I'm often asked, what is Agile? It's a hard question to answer, especially since if you asked 10 different people, you'd get 10 different answers. I find the best way to answer that question is to start by talking about Waterfall, the term for the traditional software development practices we've been using for years. So what is Waterfall? Where did it come from? Waterfall actually, as a term, started with Winston Royce, who wrote a paper in 1970 about software development. And he had a diagram similar to what you're seeing here, with all the phases of software development flowing from one to the other. And this was termed the waterfall methodology. Interesting enough, Winston Royce did not actually recommend this way. Later on in the paper, he described iterative type style development that we often see in Agile. But he is also known as the father of waterfall. There's some intrinsic problems with the waterfall methodology. You have to remember that in the 50s and 60s, computers were often as big as a house, took up an entire room. They were also made up of parts such as vacuum tubes and other engineering devices that made them hard to change. You also, to work with these, usually had to be an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer. So often, making changes to computers of this complexity were laborious and time-consuming. So to develop on these, we did need a stringent and sequential way of developing, which is the waterfall method. Doing all your analysis up front, then designing the system, deciding what you're going to develop and actually writing that code, testing that code, and then finally deploying the code to the customer. In this methodology, everyone also kind of worked in a silo. So we had specialized people. We had business analysts who were doing all the analysis for us, architects and UX designers who were doing all the design, developers who were doing actual development, you had QA who would do the testing, and then infrastructure specialists who would do all the deployment for you. One of the problems with this approach is these gaps between these siloed activities. We have to have the ability to transfer information across these silos. So how do we do that? We start with the analyst who's going to create some sort of documentation, whether this is a requirements document, functional requirements document, many different ways, but it's something that we capture all the information they've gathered while working by themselves. This then is given to the designers who are going to take that and make architect designs, technical specifications, and other types of artifacts. This style of design is called big design up front and is often attributed to the waterfall methodology. So once all of this big design is done, we can then hand this to the developers who will actually start creating the product. And once they are completely done with the product, they'll hand that over to the testers who will use test cases generated from that big design up front and the specifications. They will test it, make sure there's not any bugs. Then they'll hand that entire product over to the IT staff who will then deploy it to their customers. And this is just the flow and sequential flow of a waterfall methodology from one phase into the other. Often, a problem would happen where when developers started actually creating these products, that they found out that what they created actually doesn't work. Whether this came from a change in technology or something in the requirements that sounded good on paper, but when you actually implement it, didn't work out so well. So then we have to make a change. And now we have something implemented in code that no longer matches the documentation. So this documentation we did up front is now not viable. So these stale documents, we have to implement some type of process to constantly revisit them and make changes to them, which if you've ever been in an actual development process, you know that rarely happens. So now we have code that does not match what all the documentation is, and we've wasted a lot of time and have some misinformation out there. The waterfall methodology also usually relies on a very formal plan. So over time, they'll put these milestones at certain places, usually between the phases of development and smaller places in between. But as soon as something takes a little bit longer than it would before, so if analysis takes longer than we expected, now all these timelines are not applicable anymore. And I've spent many times going back into a meeting after meeting trying to baseline the plan or plan to the plan, when that plan was a guess in the first place, but people tend to cling to it. Also in Waterfall, because we are working in these siloed natures, there's often physical and procedural and organizational blockers between the people actually doing the work. Analysts don't talk directly to developers. They talk to architects. Testers don't talk directly to analysts. These processes, and also the fact that these people are in different areas, often creates a bigger dependency on that documentation for conveying that information, which, as we previously stated, might be outdated because we've actually changed something during the process and we may or may not have gone and updated those previous documents.